The usual starting of the session by coughing. Okay, so welcome back after the last coffee break. There are no more coffee breaks after that one, just to say, okay? I know that. But we are here because we have the second invited talk of the conference today that will be made by Sara Petti. Sara has a background in advocacy for public libraries and quality education for all, and she works at the Open Knowledge Foundation, where she leads the Open Knowledge Network and manages the frictionless data community. So please join me in a big applause for Sara. Thank you for being here.
Yes, okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Probably most of you were waiting for Arianna Becerril Garcia, but unfortunately she could not make it. So I jumped in instead. And what I will be telling you about today is basically how at Open Knowledge Foundation we're building a world open by design where all knowledge is accessible to all. Before we deep dive, just quickly introducing myself, as Silvio mentioned, I'm Sara Petti, I'm Project and Community Manager at Open Knowledge Foundation. I'm based here in Bologna, 5 minutes away walking from here. And these are some ways you can contact me via email, Blue Sky, and GitHub. So maybe some of you in the room already know Open Knowledge Foundation, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating stuff that you already know, but I thought it could be interesting for all of you to know more or less what we're doing. So the Open Knowledge Foundation is a global nonprofit. We are the pioneers, among the pioneers of open data. We started working back in 2004, and our mission is to create a fair, sustainable, and open future for all. We do that by building open infrastructure and developing open standards that basically make data more accessible, useful, and impactful for all. We work with communities around the world, and we are committed to transparency and collaboration. We support global efforts to promote open access to knowledge, data, and information. And if you want to know more, I put the website just there. So how exactly do we do that? Basically, like our work is divided in three interrelated pillars. So as I just mentioned, we build open infrastructure for people to basically consume and produce data that have better quality. And because all the tools that we develop are open source tools, of course, we have communities that gather around those tools, but also gather around some of the concepts that come out of Open Knowledge Foundation, which I'll be talking about a little bit after. And so part of the work that we do is also harnessing these communities. Those are global communities all around the world. And what we also do is we advocate for digital infrastructure that is solid, reliable, and open by design. So talking a little bit about our communities. So we have a global network. So Silvio was mentioning, I've been working with the network for a while, which spans across more than 40 countries around the world. These are communities that have expertise and are activists in the broad open knowledge movement, so in different expert areas. So we have people that work more in open science, for example, but we have also people that are civic tech activists or people that, for example, work more with open government data. Basically, all the members of the network prioritize their work based on their local needs. But then what open knowledge does is that we bring together all these people and we create this space for sharing and for learning. The network at the moment has 10 chapters that span from Brazil to Sweden, Ghana, or Nepal, and members in more than 40 countries, as I said. It was started in 2010, and it started with Open Knowledge Germany, and quite quickly it expanded to many, many places in the world. If you want to know more about the network, there's the website just there, and I encourage you to go and have a look to see about all the amazing projects that the network are doing. And where all the people are located, basically. But so what we do with this network, as I said, is creating this space where open knowledge and openness in general can be celebrated. And maybe some of you have been to some of the open knowledge festivals that happened more or less 10 years ago. And the idea of this gathering, which are a bit like this one, is really like try to bring together people that understand the transformative power of openness, and they share a space and basically like share learnings as well. I think one of the key learnings that we have at Open Knowledge is that really like across the different areas, there's so much that we can actually do together, and that the open movement is not so fragmented as they make us believe. We are, of course, very specific about what we mean by open. So maybe some of you know, but open knowledge is behind the open definition, which basically defines specifically what open means in regard to contents and dataset. And what the open definition basically says is that you can call content or a dataset open if everyone can access it freely, use it, modify it, and share it. And the open definition was released in its first version, I think around 2007. And there's a council that reviews it, and the last review actually dates from more or less 10 years ago. Maybe it's time to review it. More about this later. But one thing that I would maybe mention is that it is largely based on the open source definition, which is based on the 4 software freedoms, which basically states that data must be available as a whole. It must be shared in a convenient format and modifiable under terms that permit reuse and distribution, including the possibility of intermixing datasets. And everyone must be able to reuse it and redistribute. And last but not least, no discriminations must be made against any person, group, or fields, which means that, for example, some of the Creative Commons licenses, like the non-commercial ones, are actually not open as it is defined by the open definition. We also take data publication very seriously. So we are behind CICAN, which is the leading open source data management system that powers open data hubs and data portals around the world. Maybe it sounds new to you, but I'm quite sure that wherever you're based, basically your central government or your municipality is probably using a CICAN instance as their open data portals. All of this basically to say that at Open Knowledge, we have now almost 2 decades of experience and iteration around issues of data publication, data portability, and especially iteration with open data communities around the world. And we quite quickly realized early on in our work that, of course, openness is not enough. And I'm not telling anything new, I think, to this audience. But basically, when back in 2005, 2006, so early on, when we were working with governments, it was the moment of the big wave of open government data. And governments started to release, data sets to promote transparency and civic engagement. But basically what happened is that quite quickly, like problems emerged, of course. So it was openly released, but there were inconsistencies in formats, for example, metadata, data quality was not top. And all of this data friction, which I try to sort of like summarize a little bit in this comic, this is me banging my head against some of this data friction, were actually hindering effective data reuse. And so what quite quickly we did, another initiative that we did was the frictionless data initiative. And the idea of frictionless data, at the core of it, it's a standard, which is the data package. And the idea is that you, instead of sharing your data set with the probability, I would say, to lose, metadata along the way, you would containerize your data and you would package it together with a descriptor, data package JSON, which contains metadata and a schema. And that allows basically anyone to directly reuse your data without having to go through back and forth and all these kind of things. So as I said, this was developed, the first data package was released around 2007. But quite quickly, it started to gain traction. So it was thought for, the government audience, but it quite quickly gained traction also among the research communities. And when around 2016, the FAIR principles came out, actually, we quickly discovered that the data package was a perfect response to that. And so at the moment, for example, data package is widely used also by research facilities and services like GBIF or Picodemo, because it's a way to ensure that data is high quality and that it can be validated. So what we also care about, and it's behind all of these initiatives, of course, is transparency, which I know it's something that is at the heart of this community as well. And so I just wanted to mention two of the projects that maybe more reflect that. One was our Open Trials project, which basically opened up all trials, medical trial data for researchers around the world. And with a similar philosophy, but a different area, I would say. There was also the open spending project at a certain moment, which was opening up basically government spending data around the world. Oops. So all of this to give you a little bit of an impression of what like open knowledge does. And I would say that if we have to think about it, of course, we're interested, in transparency, but what we are really interested in is questioning the status quo and really trying to reimagine how things can be done for the common good. And as part of this kind of thinking, we launched last year an initiative which is called the Tech We Want. We did so through an online summit back in October, which was highly successful. And the idea behind the Tech We Want is really coming from an observation of the current reality of technology, where technology is getting very, very complex. And there are all these layers of complexity that you cannot opt out from. And even to do sometimes the simplest task, you have to basically get the whole package in, which it's, not great in terms of like maintenance, but it's also not great in terms of sustainability from many points of view. In terms of sustainability in terms of labor, sustainability in terms of costs, sustainability also in terms of environmental impact. And so what we're trying to think is there a way to maybe develop simpler technology to address simpler problems? We acknowledge, of course, that complex problems may require complex solutions, but the reality is that today, even to do the simplest task, we have to basically buy the full package. And this is especially costly for lower resource organizations or places, which means that also like there's a lot of people that lag behind. And as part of this, the Tech We Want Summit and the Tech We Want Initiative, we have been developing lately an application called Open Data Editor, which I'm just mentioning here because it was an interesting project. So the application is a desktop application that was thought, once again, for people with no technical skills to help them validate the data sets, basically checking for errors and quickly find basically where they were located in a data set. And this is with the idea of being able to have data that is published and consumed with higher quality. The application was initially thought, for small NGOs, maybe small public administrations that don't have the technical resources to have someone devoted, a technical team devoted to that. But quite interestingly, as I was making the case before also for frictionless data, this application gained traction also among researchers, and we're really sort of like surprised as well that this can help so much in contexts that were different from the one that we initially thought about. And it also made us, jump out of a lot of assumptions and reconsider a lot of like the language that we're using, how we are used to talk a lot to very technical people. And so we had to rethink about also how we were addressing these people in order for them to be included basically in this. So in a nutshell, basically what I wanted to say today is that the sad reality today is that institutions around the world are rapidly decaying. There is a culture that we notice more and more of knowledge privatizations. Knowledge is locked away under behind paywalls, and there's basically like the whole system is made for the benefits of the few and not the many. And this is an institutional architecture that is basically designed to continue the cycle of exploitation. So all of the stuff that we do at Open Knowledge Foundation is to kind of like go against this kind of like problem, which we know it's a common problem also here for this audience. And so basically, like my call to arms today to all of you will be if we can maybe we need to develop new models to reduce barriers to access knowledge, but we also need to inspire communities and groups and movements around the world to design the institutional architecture in a different way. And so basically talking to a lot of you yesterday, but also today, this is, and also like hearing about the talk that was given this morning, this is maybe something that we could all do together somehow. We are all made to believe that we are not so many and we tend to stay in our little circle. But actually, the truth is that if we get together, we can build a critical mass. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention to you today is let's not underestimate the power of communities for building better ecosystems that can push change. I think there's a lot of stuff that we can do together. And sometimes you can be surprised about how much the connection with like other areas of knowledge that you had not thought about, as it was the case for many of the projects I talked about, can actually like bring new things in. So yeah, my goal would be let's try to join forces and maybe do stuff together. I think we need spaces like this one where we can all work together. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Any question for the audience? Late afternoon after the last coffee, but don't be shy.
It's hot as well.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, John.
I was just thinking you were talking a little bit about the chapters and the human groups of people who are around the world working towards the goals of open knowledge. So I was just thinking, in these discussions here, we're talking a lot about internal institutional commitments to things and project-based work. And I was just maybe some thoughts about how this kind of a little more insulated work around how to change the nuances of academia and tracking things maps to a more kind of groundswell community-based model that you're doing with other things within open knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that we try to do within the network. So most of the projects that I showed you also, like, and that I was talking about, are projects where the network is also involved, but then other communities are also brought in. So the idea is really like with the network to build a space where this kind of like cross-pollination or whatever you want to call them can happen. And I think a lot of the initiatives also that we did in the past, like the Open Knowledge Festivals, were very powerful in that sense. I'm always very surprised. Like, I think the last Open Knowledge Festival was probably like 10 years ago, something like this. And still now I meet people that say, oh, we met at this festival and we're still doing a project together because, that event was so great. We met there. We knew that we had interest and that we had a common kind of like mission and common values that still now actually think people are building on top of that. So yeah, I think like gathering and celebrations and providing spaces for people to come together, it's absolutely something that we care a lot about at Open Knowledge and that I think could be very useful for also, the community here. Thanks for the question.
Some of what you're doing reminds me of the great work of that OpenCon did in terms of community building. I don't know if you're aware of them, Spark did, but they haven't had a meeting for a while. But I was wondering in terms, because you're covering so many countries and different contexts, how are the projects you're doing, to what extent are they locally based versus globally based, and how do you bridge those different contexts and make it relevant to the various disciplines, cultures that you're working with?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And I don't have an easy answer for that, of course. I think a lot of the initiatives that are initiated by the network tend to be more local at the beginning, but then if there is interest in the network space, they can be elevated to either a regional level, for example, or a global level sometimes. Some of the initiatives, for example, that I talked about were actually initiated by network people more locally, and then because there was growing interest, they kind of like got elevated. A lot of those initiatives also, like at Open Knowledge, we launched them at a certain moment, and then when they were ready to kind of like walk on their own, we let them go as well. So that's also another way. There's no one project which is exactly like another one, so it's difficult to say. There's no recipe that fits all, of course. But generally speaking, I think the idea is like not to be too attached to something, but I mean, having the sort of like generosity and kindness to let it go if you really care about a project. And yeah, and trying to create connections as much as possible, I guess. I think that, again, like spaces like the network space are particularly important because they can give a global dimension to something that is very local, and therefore giving an opportunity for the projects to grow. But then not all projects need to grow. You know, some projects need to stay local, and it's fine like this. So I don't know if this is answering your question, but it's part of like our thinking, let's say.
You kept thank you for the talk. You kept coming back, and one of those people was at some of those open knowledge fests. I think it was 15 years ago. And as you said that, it sort of suddenly hit me. I mean, this meeting is the first time many of us have seen each other for 5 years, and there's a whole group of people I don't know I know your names, I know the projects, but I haven't actually met them. And thinking back to that 2010, 2015 kind of period, I guess it was pre-mass adoption of social media. It was certainly pre our current focus on traveling less. That was a. What's your sense? Have we lost something in those big general meetings, or is it something we need to create in a different way today? I guess the answer is probably both. But yeah, I'm just interested to know what are the ways we regenerate that cross community fertilization? It seems to be harder today than it was then.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I think, I mean, right now we're a bit in like shifting times as well. I think, as you mentioned, that was a lot of those all of the Open Knowledge Festival happened before the pandemic and before global adoption of social media. But like what we're witnessing now, it's a massive drop of social media as well. So I think that those spaces that kind of like got online because of many reasons, because of the pandemic, because of social media and everything, they're not online anymore. I don't know about you, but like something that I notice a lot is that places where I was having conversations, Twitter, is not there anymore. And so, I mean, it's there, but we don't want to be there. But there are alternatives, but those kind of conversation and interactions are not really happening anymore, and it's kind of like distributed. And maybe that's even for the best, you know. I mean, I'm not saying that it's something wrong, but so I think now, in light of that, global gathering and global celebration are probably becoming more and more important. You know, I like to think that, I mean, things I think go in waves a lot, and so I think that now we're back in a wave in which basically like getting together is important. There are other ways, of course. You can get online together, but it's not exactly the same thing, and there's a fatigue linked to that, I think, post-pandemic. So, I mean, I wouldn't bet on it, but I would say that global gatherings are probably gaining in importance again, and you see it here, I think, as well. So again, maybe not answering your question, but
Any other question? Okay, then if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you again, Sara, for being here.